Phil Lindeman, Krystal 93 News Director, and I'm in the studio today with CJ Mueller, Breckenridge's own speed skiing Olympian. CJ, thanks for coming in.
Oh, you're welcome, Phil. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to be talking, and we were just talking Olympic stuff. You haven't been watching the Olympics, but you've been keeping up with it.
I don't have TV, so I haven't been watching it on TV, but I've been watching it on, watching a lot of the videos on Facebook and also just videos that NBC posts later. And I'm lucky because I've got a bunch of friends that are over there. Tom Kelly, who's the communications director of the U.S. ski team, posts stuff. Doug Lewis is over there working, and he posts stuff. Peter Foley, who's the head coach of the snowboard team, has been posting some really cool videos. He happened to be at the finish of the cross-country sprint race, and so that's been great.
We were just talking about that one, too. Superhuman.
Yes. I'm not a cross-country skier, but oh my gosh, I've been watching those girls kicking Randall and Jessie Diggins since they won the World Championships in 2013, and it was unbelievable to watch her finish, and then it was really fun to a day or two later than to watch some of the videos of, unfortunately not the whole race, but some of the bits and pieces of the whole race.
Yeah, well, all I caught from the race was that last straightaway, and yeah, like we were just saying, it looked like she had a nitrous button.
Yes.
that she hit in the last second. She was just able to come out of nowhere and get the gold, first ever gold. And like you were saying, you're not a cross-country skier, but still had a blast watching that, keeping track of those ladies. What's your favorite events to watch? What do you like keeping up with?
You know, since I was in the Olympics and was a part of the whole thing, it was interesting because when I raced, I was a favorite and there was pressure, and I ended up not having a good run, came in 10th place. I like the stories, everybody's story. Nick Baumgartner, the snowboard cross guy that came in 4th place, he took his son, 12 or 13 years old, over, and his son got to enjoy the experience with him. And I just saw a really great video of him, and he's just, I think all the guys on the snowboard cross team work construction jobs in the summer so that they can pay for the thing. And I love those stories like that. So I don't have a favorite sport. I'm not a snowboarder. I've never done it. I would like to try, but my wrists are in terrible shape. But the Red Gerard thing, it's how can you not like that?
Oh yeah, I mean so much fun. Well, and that's half the Olympics. It feels like half of it is the results, that people are paying attention to that, and the other half is the cool stories, the things that got those people.
Everybody's stories, and not just the Americans, but everybody's stories. The people, and unfortunately, there's some crazy things too, like the girl that went down the the ski half pipe.
Yes,
and just didn't even barely got to the lip of the thing. And I mean, it's an interesting thing that can only happen at the Olympics.
Yeah, it can only happen at the Olympics that somebody would be able to qualify without the sort of run that you even see on an average weekend at Breckenridge.
Yeah.
But go figure. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun watching these. Now, tell me about your Olympic experience. So there was a long run up to the Olympics. 92. You were at the games. Where was that?
In the host city was Albertville, France, and the speed skiing was in Les Arcs. And the way it kind of came about was that Les Arcs didn't have any Olympic events, and they wanted to have an Olympic event. And I don't know what all the politics and what all was involved. I'm sure there was a lot of money involved, but they convinced the IOC to do a speed skiing demonstration. And why not? The track was right there. It was very competitive. A lot of people doing it at the time.
Yeah. Was that one of the few tracks in the world, really, for speed skiing, or
at the
really?
time it was? At the time, it was the only world record track. We had done some things down in Silverton, but Silverton was very inaccessible. Les Arcs was accessible. There were several other speed skiing tracks that were slower speeds.
Okay. And like you said, they wanted to do a test event, see what it was all about, and you were part of that. What was the atmosphere like at an Olympics?
I was told that we had the second biggest crowd of the Olympics for the final day of the speed skiing. It was interesting because my whole speed skiing career, I started in '81, and my whole career, there were hardly any spectators at the races. I mean, there were spectators, but in Les Arcs, a lot of them were just up on the side of the hill and not down in the finish area. And when I came down on my first training run for the Olympics, there was a huge crowd of people in the arrival area. And when I was ready to leave the arrival area, got all my gear and was ready to leave, there was seemingly no way through. They had a little gate for us, but the people were all jammed up, and it was probably 40 or 50 people deep. And so I just looked at the gate and had my skis over my shoulder and my bag of gear, and I just started walking toward the opening. And as soon as I walked there, the people just kind of parted, and I walked through. And I actually, the only time ever in my life, I got kind of anxious, a little bit of an anxiety attack, I guess you would call it, because I was in this crowd of people, and it was just very, very strange.
Well, yeah, almost like being at a concert. All of a sudden, there's this Olympic event that's being treated like.
I'm not a concert goer, so maybe I should have trained for the Olympics by going to some concerts.
Now that course, you had been on that track before.
Several times.
Yeah, you were.
In fact, I was one of the first ones ever to speed ski on that in 1981. There were, I think, 5 of us that went up and tested the track one day. I just happened to be there and met some of the speed skiers, and they said, "Oh, come up and do this with us." And it was the first time anybody had speed skied in Les Arcs, and it was just a handful of us testing the track. So I was one of the first ones on the track, and raced there every year for the next 13 years.
Yeah, kind of almost like a home base a little bit. Got pretty familiar with that hill?
Really familiar, not only with the hill, but with the town, Berg St. Maurice down below, and with the ski area. And yeah, very familiar. It was fun, a fun part of life when I was flying into Geneva for the races and renting a car and just knew exactly how to get through town. I didn't get confused anymore. It was like, wow, I'm starting to figure this out.
Second home in the hills of France. What were the big countries for speed skiing? Who were the big players?
Finland actually had some really fast people, and in fact, CJ Mueller from Finland won the women's speed skiing. The United States was really strong, and France was really strong. In fact, I heard that we were only able to enter 4 competitors from each country, and I heard that a couple of the French forerunners had speeds that were in the top 10, that would have been in the top 10 if they had been participating in the race, but they were only allowed 4 racers.
Okay. Well, and it was a FIS event beforehand. How long was it on the World Cup circuit?
It was only became a FIS event because of the Olympics, and so I think the first FIS race was in 1988 in Japan, and then the FIS kind of took over most of it from there, and we did several FIS races after that. And I think the last FIS races were in no, I shouldn't say that because they're still going on. They actually now have, I think the first World Cup that was awarded was in 1990 for the overall, and I missed winning it by 1,000th of a second in the last race. 1,000th of a second in the last race. And that's when they first given the same Krystal globes out to the speed skiers, and they still do that.
When it comes to the Olympics, being there, not just racing, what did you enjoy the most about being at an Olympics Games?
That's like trying to pick a favorite sport. There were so many memories. I mean, one of my most vivid memories is you go to France and you hear the stories about how the French people are rude. And that can definitely be the case. I remember going to a ski show one time in London, and at the American booths, all the people that were working the booths were walking out and meeting the people that were walking by and handing them information. Mm-hmm. And I went upstairs wandering around the first day I was there, and I came to the French booths. And the thing that struck me the most was that the people that were manning the booths were actually trying to hide. They were sitting back almost behind their stuff, smoking a cigarette, not wanting to interact with the people. And during the Olympics, it was a total change. And certainly all French people aren't like that. That hasn't been my experience, but you experience it all the time. And during the Olympics, it was just a total night and day situation. They were all very excited. We were the first week we were there, we trained at an area that was outside of the Olympic area. Mm-hmm. And the only clothing, I didn't want to take a bunch of clothing over there, so the clothing that we had was the stuff they gave us when we got there for the ski jacket and stuff. So I'm walking around in this little ski town with my U.S. Olympic team jacket on, going out to dinner and stuff. And the people were coming up and wanting to talk to you. And it's like, that never happened in France. And so that's one of my big memories. And then when we went back for the race in April, the Olympics were in February. When we went back for our race in April, it had all just gone back to the way that it was.
the French were French again. Oh, that's too great. Well, was it a weird experience? Like you said, it was crazy to be at the bottom of the race and have a crowd that you would see at a concert. Was it a kind of a surreal experience to, be on Team USA and walk around and have people, not recognize you personally, but just the fact that you were an Olympic athlete there?
Not that so much. I think, I did one morning before training, I did an interview with the CBS national weather guy, Mark, I can't remember his last name, and just went out in front of the hotel, and we had our certain little 2-minute slot, and we talked for a while, and little things like that never would have ever happened. We're at the ski race, and it's just before I go up and ski, so I'm out joking around with him and having fun with him, and then go up to the ski race.
Yeah, well, and that brings us to ski racing itself then. Who else was on the U.S. team for speed skiing?
Oh, let's see. Jeff Hamilton ended up getting the bronze medal, and he had just started racing like 2 years before, but he was very focused. He was a really good skier. Jim Morgan was one of the 4 guys on the team from California, and he was the 4th guy to be picked. He hadn't had great results, but he got picked because he had good results in Les Arcs in previous years, and he came through, and I think he ended up in 8th place and had the best race of his life, I think, and just a great experience, and he did a really great job. Dale Womack was the 4th American guy, and all 4 of the Americans made it into the final 20 for the final day. All 4 of the French made it into the final for the final day, and all 4 of the Swiss made it into the final. So out of the 20 finalists, 12 of them were either Swiss, French, or American. So we had a good, strong team.
Yeah, a pretty stacked field for those 3 countries, definitely. Now, you said that you didn't have the best race that you could have gone through. Talk me through the run that you had, if you can think back to it. What went well and what didn't go well?
Well, we had 2 runs that morning, and I had been doing okay in the qualifying. I qualified, but I hadn't been winning any of the runs. And the first run of the day, which interestingly was my first run of the day, I went out, got on the lift, rode up, and my first run of the day was around 130 miles an hour. Very first run of the day. And then went back up for the next run, and there had been a little bump in the track just above the 100-meter time trap. In speed skiing, you start at the top, and there's no timing or wand or anything up there. You just take off. Mm-hmm. We work our way higher each run so we can go a little faster and a little faster. And then there's a 100-meter speed trap that they set up with surveying equipment to make sure it's very precise, so the speeds are very accurate. And just before you came into the 100-meter trap, there was a bump. And when I hit that bump on my very first run, it jarred me really bad. But as the days went by, that got smoothed up and smoothed up. And I didn't feel it so much on my first run of the final day. But then on the second run of the final day, I came down and just felt that bump a little bit, and I started to twist to the left. And my instinct, as I was twisting to the left, was to straighten myself out by pulling my right hand. And as soon as my hands came apart, the wind broke in between them and hit my body, and I opened up very briefly, but I figure I lost Well, a friend of mine who was watching said there was a good chance that I would have been the fastest guy there if I hadn't done it, but that's what happens.
Well, and that's all it takes in speed skiing. The times are so fast, people are cruising.
1.7 seconds to go 100 meters.
Man, and that's how the timing works. It's timed max speed that you have in those
in the 100 meters, yeah. And they actually try and calculate on the hill where the best spot to put that time trap is, so that we're hitting our maximum speed at our high speeds. If you're going 90 or 100 miles an hour, you can put the trap further down. But then as you're coming down and getting higher speeds, then as the track starts to flatten out, suddenly you start slowing down as you're going through. So it's better to have the trap a little higher up the run.
Okay, yeah. It's interesting. I don't really think, I'm trying to think of any other Olympic sports that are like that. It seems like most Olympic sports are races. There's a finish line and a start line, and it's fastest time from start to finish. Not so much the fastest period, fastest speed.
Well, the individual ones, yeah. Other than like the snowboard cross and stuff, they don't. And some of the ice skating races, it's man against man, so it doesn't really matter what the time is as long as you're the first one to cross the line.
Yeah, wild stuff. What did you like about speed skiing in general? It's a sport that burned fast and burned out quick.
When I went in 1981 and they asked me to come do it, I had been downhill racing and my knees were starting to get a little sore. And I went and first run did 100 miles an hour. And I just thought, this is really cool because it didn't hurt my knees. And I had gotten, even though I was not much of an athlete in high school, I had just gotten to where I really liked skiing and skiing fast. I'd gotten involved in downhill racing. And it was, the other thing that really struck me about it the first time I did it was just the camaraderie of the people that were doing it. They weren't competitive. They were more interested in their individual personal best than they were in beating anybody. And that was one of the really cool things about speed skiing, was that most of the people that were there were just trying to do their personal best rather than to beat everybody else. And so that's more what the races were about for most of the racers, was just going a little faster than you'd ever been.
Huh. Yeah, that's fascinating. That's a different side of the sport that you just don't see sometimes, especially not at the Olympics, because the Olympics is so much, I got to get the gold. Got to be top of the podium. Got to be the...
I do have to tell you, I become a fan of Sofia Goggia from Italy. Mm-hmm. And so I follow her on Facebook, and she posted the coolest statement, I guess you would call it, after the Super G, when she didn't do so well. But she just talked about the joy of skiing and how she felt when she was going down, and how great it was to feel competitive and feel in control and just be doing it because she loved doing it so much.
Yeah, I love hearing that too. Well, and it reminds me a little bit of Lindsey Vonn. She had her final interview and she was saying the same thing. She said that I just love this sport so much. I don't want to leave, but my body can't take it.
Yeah, and when I was downhill racing, it was the same thing. You'd make a run, you'd get to the bottom, and you just wanted to go up and do it again because it was so much fun most of the time.
Most of the time, I'd imagine, except for the times that you got to bail. Did you ever have to bail on the speed skis, or was that not an option when you're speed skiing?
Oh, it happened, and people got hurt, and there were some bad crashes, and there have actually been a couple of people over the long period of time that have died. I've never been around anything like that. But Dick Dorworth, who wrote he's written several books actually, and he talks about a guy who died at one of the races that he was at. But it doesn't happen very often, and especially now with the FIS running the races since I've retired, they're very, very conscious of safety. But yeah, it happens. The only crash I really remember, I was doing an exhibition race in Japan, and they prepared the track, but they didn't prepare the finish area. and it had snowed a little bit, and it was smooth, but there was fresh snow in the finish area. So we came down this prepared track, and all of a sudden we were in an inch or two of powder in the finish area, which wasn't too bad, except it just kind of grabbed one of my skis, and so I fell down and unfortunately bent my ski, but that wasn't a bad experience at all.
Bent the ski better than bending the knee.
Yeah, exactly.
Or bending the leg. So speed skiing still happens to this day.
Yeah, the record, I mean, I went 137 miles an hour was my top speed. I was the first guy ever to go faster than 130 miles an hour. And now they're knocking on the door at 160 miles an hour. I think the record now is 158. If you go on YouTube and just search for world's fastest skier, you will find videos of these Italian guys breaking the world record. It's two brothers, actually, and one of them has done it several times, and then the brother came down and actually won last year, and they just keep bumping it up, edging closer and closer to 160 miles an hour.
Incredible. I mean, I don't think I've been in a car that's been going.
I know I haven't. The fastest I think I've been in a car was 108, and that was in a police cruiser. And we were just messing around years and years ago, and it was with a certified speedometer, went 108 miles an hour, and I think one time when I was in Europe on the Autobahn in a cheap little rental car, I was going down a hill, and I thought, okay, I'm going to see how fast I can go. And I just got up to 100 miles an hour, and the car started shaking, and I went, that's enough.
You got to love it when your speed skis are more stable than whatever little Beamer you were rolling around with on the Autobahn. Yeah. How have you seen the sport change over time then? Obviously people are just going faster and faster. What else has changed with the sport of speed skiing?
Well, unfortunately, there's not very many people doing it anymore. When I got involved, of course, Steve McKinney and Tommy Simons were the Americans who had been breaking the records in Cervinia, and they were every season, when the season started, there would be a story in the first skiing magazine about what they had done back in April or May in Cervinia. The Yankee speed hippies is what the Italians called them. And that popularized speed skiing in the United States, and there started to be some races, and Silverton started happening, and when I was racing, there would sometimes be almost 200 people racing. And now I think there's maybe 30. And so that's changed a lot, which is unfortunate. And there's really nobody from the U.S. Apparently there's a guy, I think he's a Finnish guy who lives in the U.S. somewhere and goes over and races as an American. And he's been living here for a long time, but he's not competitive. And it's very frustrating that I ran some races at Cooper, and we did some little races at Breckenridge, and we tried to get people involved, and actually had some really fun races, little 80, 90 mile an hour races, and people got all jazzed about it and would go over to Europe. It's gotten more expensive though too. The suits are more expensive. The helmets are much more expensive. The skis. Now when I was racing, I'd get free skis and boots and bindings, and they really took care of you back then in the 80s because it was a whole different economic situation. And now they're probably the very top guys are getting taken care of pretty good and have some pretty good sponsors. But if you were an American guy and wanted to take up speed skiing, it would be fairly expensive to get all the gear and then to go over and get started. Plus, it'd be a little more intimidating too, because sometimes the first run is almost as fast as I ever went.
Yeah, like you were saying, it's just the sport is just getting faster and bigger and harder. And it seems like a lot of sports that the top tier, the top 5%, handful of guys are getting treated, making a living off of this, but everybody else, you're not making a living exactly off of.
Yeah, and struggling to pay for the expenses.
Yeah, very true. Now, when it comes to the Olympics in general, I mean, you've seen plenty of Olympics over time. Why do you think speed skiing disappeared from the Olympics?
Well, a big thing was there are rumors. There was a guy that got killed free skiing the morning of the final, and the big rumor is that speed skiing didn't go any further in the Olympics because of that, but that's not even near the truth. The big thing is that in '92 is the last year that Summer Olympics and Winter Olympics were the same year. And to offset them, then they had a Winter Olympics 2 years later in Lillehammer in 1994. And Norway was not prepared to spend the money at that time because they'd already gone through their whole deal and they were all ready to go even 2 years in advance, and they weren't prepared to all of a sudden throw another event in there in 2 years' time. Plus, the FIS didn't really understand speed skiing very well. They thought that it was just something that was done for a world record. But most of the FIS races now, the World Cup races that they do, are 110 miles an hour. And so most of the races are what would be considered a slow race. And then the race for the record isn't even part of the FIS. They go back, they had a World Cup in Vars, France, earlier this year. I think the top speed was around 130. And then they'll go back later in the year, then it's not a FIS race, and they'll race for the record in, I think, the end of March. They'll race for the record and try and break the record.
Well, these days, how fast are you going on skis?
Let's see. My fastest speed was 137, and I think today I might have hit about 37. It's actually it's hard to talk about because this winter I just have felt weak and sore, much more than I ever have before. And I'm happy to be up skiing, but I'm not skiing very strong. In fact, the first time that I skied the upper part of Peak 7 all season long was just yesterday.
Oh, really? But like you said, still getting out on skis.
Yeah.
Yeah, still getting out there. When you get out and ski these days, what kind of skiing are you doing?
Mostly cruising on the groomers. I love nothing more than making laps on Peak 7, riding up the Imperial Chair, going over and riding up the T-bar and up the Imperial and making laps on Peak 7. And when the snow over there is good, it's so much fun. And when you hit it when the lines are short and you can just keep making laps, it's really awesome. And that's what I love doing the most. But this year I've just been trying to get myself to where I'm not so sore and not so weak. And I've been skiing a lot of groomed black runs. But that's better because at the beginning of the year I was skiing groomed green runs.
But no matter what, you can't beat being on skis. Just
riding up the lift. I don't tell people anymore, hey, let's go skiing together. I go, hey, let's go ride some lifts together.
Sometimes that's my favorite part of the day. You get to hang out with buddies, meet some new buddies.
I bumped into two people just yesterday that we had mutual friends, and we happened to figure it out as we were riding up the chair.
Go figure. Small world when you're out on the ski hill. But CJ, thanks again for making time to come in and talk speed skiing and the one and only time speed skiing was at the Olympics and your experience there. It's been fantastic hearing more about kind of the lost sport.
Well, thanks for inviting me. And I really love watching the Olympics, and I love the Olympic time of year because it's fun to reminisce, even though that was 26 years ago. Is that right? Yeah, 26. Wow. 26 years ago. What happened?
If you think about it, it makes it seem even further, I think. Well, CJ, thanks again for making time to come in and reminisce. It's been great.
Thank you, Phil.
Now, of course, CJ Mueller talking about speed skiing at the Olympics and this year's Olympic Games. Phil Lindemann on Krystal 93.